Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating high-stakes mechanism of democracy. Have you ever wondered how a small domestic group living inside a global superpower actually organizes itself to influence that superpower's foreign policy? Well, today we're going to look at the anatomy of this kind of influence. We'll see exactly how diasporas shape massive decisions and literally direct billions of tax dollars that echo all across the world. I want to start off by hitting you right away with this pretty striking statistic. 0.1%. That is the estimated percentage of the United States population that's of Armenian descent. When you think about it, it's a tiny, tiny fraction of the American demographic pie. Okay, let's dive into this. How does a group that makes up roughly 0.1% of the population shape the foreign policy of the world's most powerful nation? It's a central paradox, and honestly, it's what makes this case study so incredibly compelling. It's basically a masterclass in organization, focus, and strategic mobilization. To answer that question, we're going to follow a clear five-step roadmap today. Number 1, ethnic lobbies in America. 2, the Armenian-American case. 3, the lobbying machinery. 4, decades of political triumphs. And finally, number 5, the limits of power. All right, starting off with Section 1, ethnic lobbies in America. Understanding the basics. So before we look at our specific case study, we really need to understand the macro concept here. At their core, ethnic lobbies are political organizations established along cultural, religious, or racial lines, and they seek to directly influence U.S. foreign policy in support of their homelands. Now, traditionally, the most active groups in the U.S. have been the Jewish and Irish diasporas, but that landscape has expanded significantly to include Arab, Greek, Hispanic, and Indian Americans, just to name a few. Their ultimate goal? The well-being of their ethnic kin, wherever they reside. Let's move on to Section 2, the Armenian-American case, a micro-example of macro power. Now, depending on the source you're looking at, the exact number of Armenian Americans varies greatly, anywhere from around 308,000 all the way up to 2 million. They're highly concentrated in key electoral states, places like California, Massachusetts, New York, and Jersey. So while their overall numbers remain relatively small, their concentration in these specific areas, combined with a profound motivation, gives them some very real electoral clout. And what really unites this diaspora is a highly concentrated foreign policy agenda. Their primary goals are incredibly clear. They want to strengthen ties between the U.S. and Armenia, achieve universal recognition of the 1915-23 genocide, support the self-determination of Nagorno-Karabakh, lift blockades imposed by Turkey and Azerbaijan, and place common-sense restrictions on U.S. military assistance to those rival nations. It is a highly focused list that guides absolutely all of their efforts. Moving right along to Section 3, the lobbying machinery, lifting the hood. Now, what's really interesting here is that the movement we're exploring is largely driven by two main engines, and they operate quite differently. First, you've got the Armenian National Committee of America, or the ANCA. This is a fierce grassroots movement with historical roots in the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, and it boasts some really strong regional branches. In contrast, you have the Armenian Assembly of America, which was founded in 1972. This one is much more Washington, D.C. centric. It focuses heavily on high-level institutional ties, building relationships with entities like the UM and the U.S. Holocaust Museum. Now, you might be thinking this kind of ideological schism would weaken them, right? Actually, scratch that. It's the exact opposite. Fascinatingly, this fragmentation actually doubled their resources. Because these two organizations were competing, they went ahead and built parallel structures. We're talking research institutes, youth clubs, media outlets, even summer camps. This competition mobilized massive alternative resources and attracted participants at the grassroots level, and they did the whole shebang without relying on foreign state funding. All right, Section 4, decades of political triumphs, validating the power. So the crucial point is that this high degree of organization translated into a massive figure, $2 billion. Since its independence from the Soviet Union, and largely due to the efforts of these lobbying organizations, Armenia has received nearly $2 billion in U.S. government aid. Just to put that into perspective, that makes it the second largest per capita recipient of U.S. assistance, right behind Israel. And these successes weren't just a flash in the pan, they were sustained over decades. Let's look at the timeline. In 1992, they successfully pushed through Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act, which restricted aid to Azerbaijan. Fast forward to 1995, a bipartisan congressional caucus was formed. Then came the most emotional and long-sought priority. In 2019, the U.S. Congress formally recognized the 1915 to 1923 massacres as genocide, and that was followed by official recognition from the U.S. president in 2021. This really goes to show that they didn't just win major symbolic resolutions, they also secured vital tactical wins. For instance, they successfully lobbied for the Humanitarian Aid Corridor Act. They actively fought against U.S. aid for bypass pipelines that would have isolated Armenia. And they even successfully blocked U.S. ambassadorial appointments they deemed unfavorable, like placing a hold on the nomination of Matthew Bryza to Azerbaijan. They masterfully learned exactly how to pull the levers of government. Which brings us to our final section. Section 5. The Limits of Power, a Modern Reality Check. Now, as much as we've talked about their influence, every system has its boundaries. The 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War exposed the hard limits of what a domestic lobby can actually achieve. As analysts have noted, and I'll quote here, the inability of the community to outweigh the balance in the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War and Armenia's near-total defeat highlighted the limitations of diaspora policy and impact. It's a stark reminder of the limits of diaspora policy when hard military power and foreign wars are involved. Let's see how this dynamic plays out in real time during a crisis. During the 2020 war, the diaspora mobilized intensely, really focusing on 3 steps. 1. Holding massive protests and awareness campaigns, even utilizing high-profile celebrities like Cher and Serj Tankian. 2. Urgently briefing the U.S. Congress and the media. And 3. Demanding the enforcement of that 1992 Section 907 law to stop military aid to Azerbaijan. They literally pulled every alarm they had. Yet, despite all of that, they hit a brick wall at the executive branch. You see, since 2002, successive U.S. presidents have utilized what's known as a presidential waiver to bypass Section 907 entirely. And despite fierce pushback from the lobby, which included legislative amendments in both the House and the Senate, administrations, including the Biden administration in 2021 and 2022, just continue to waive the restrictions. Ultimately, executive branch national security interests and broader regional geopolitics simply overrode the ethnic lobby's demands. Which leaves us with a really vital question to ponder today. In an era of rapidly shifting global geopolitics, how must ethnic lobbies evolve to maintain their influence? The Armenian-American case study shows us the incredible heights a highly organized domestic group can reach, but it also shows us the harsh reality of international relations. It's a compelling reminder of the constant push and pull in foreign policy formulation. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep questioning and keep learning.